I met him when he was at Carnegie Mellon doing environmental engineering and public policy. And before that, he was at Caltech. And now he's working his way eastward and northward. And I'm told that Syracuse University promised him snow for cross-country skiing. They left Pittsburgh. Megan, Cliff said she wants to introduce you. So Megan is a part of the deal here. She's seriously. Cliff does a lot of amazing things, but partly because Megan is a logistic wonder worker on the home front.
Right. So my wife, Megan, has not accompanied me to Greenland, but she has seen the photos of Greenland probably 1,000 times. So she's now well qualified. So she'll correct me if I'm.
I will. I'll try.
She's very good at that. So.
And they do travel for research for Megan's book. She writes romance, historical romance novels. So they go to Scotland, Denmark. Well, never mind.
We're sorry
The band waits of the year.
Yeah. Have a member who also.
A writer.
Yeah.
I guess
They're in Florida. Greg said they're in Florida. They'll be back.
Yeah, they won't be back until the end of April or something.
Okay, well, thank you.
Great. There's a little bit of an echo.
That's what
It's
it's
coming,
coming, but I'm not
I
sure.
thought it might have come from the computer laptop. maybe?
But this has got the microphone that's picking up and then the sound from Zoom. If someone speaks on Zoom,
It is what it is.
I have to say, I haven't heard it yet, but I don't.
It's very faint, so I think we can live with it.
Because for a moment it was coming from my phone.
Okay, well, maybe that's what it was.
That might have been what it was.
Great. Okay, so I usually like to do these talks very informally, which means that you can feel free to ask questions at any time. Just raise your hand or just blurt it out. However you'd like to do it is just fine.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Oh, sure. Is this better? To talk louder?
Hearing aid today.
Okay. Okay.
David, there's a chair right there.
Get close to this one.
Get close to
Yeah.
It's got your name, David.
There you go.
All right. So let me ask, have any of you been to Greenland? You've been to Greenland? Very nice. Where in Greenland were you at?
Just down the west coast.
On the west coast. Okay. Down near the bottom? By two. Very nice. Okay. Well, certainly you can interrupt me at any time and add your anecdotes. It'll be fine. You've been to Greenland. Where in Greenland have you been?
I was on the southwest coast, sailed over from Nova Scotia,
Oh, okay. Oh, very nice.
doubled back to Newfoundland.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So some of these figures might be familiar to you. Now, normally I intersperse text slides and figures back and forth. However, I actually, and my wife can vouch for this. I was putting together some of the slides to be as up to date as possible last night, and I didn't have a chance to intermingle the figures with the text slides. So we're going to start with a couple of maps of Greenland, and then we're going to go to text slides, and we can talk about those. And then there'll be a lot of figures that we'll go through. Okay, so with that as an introduction, let's see if this is going to advance. There we go. Okay, so what is Greenland? And where is Greenland? We'll talk about Greenland in ancient times, then the Middle Ages, then the transition to a colony of Denmark, and then the new home rule policy that Greenland and Denmark signed. I think it was around 2008 or 2009, something like that. So now, how many of you have been to Denmark? I know Susan is one of them. Okay, John has been. Oh, a few others. Okay. I don't know if you had any impressions of this relationship between Denmark and Greenland when you were there. But again, feel free to jump into the conversation at any time. All righty. Not hearing anything. Now, that's going to be in the way. And I don't have that on my computer. See where it says, not hearing anything, turn up volume. I don't want to take a lot of time to do this.
Here, let me see.
Going over that.
Oh, look at that. That's why Carl is here. I am not very computer versed. Very good. Thank you. And then we'll talk about the political interest in Greenland and then some scientific studies. All right. So here you can see a view of the Arctic region as well as the mid-latitudes. So here's Greenland, and Greenland actually has the northernmost point of land on the planet. And so it is the closest to the North Pole, which is 713 kilometers, which is 400 miles from the North Pole. And that is the closest point of land to the North Pole anywhere. So Greenland has that distinction. And I put down the credit to Tom Van Sant, who has a lot of these kinds of maps posted online. All right, what is Greenland? Well, simply speaking, it is the largest island in the world, because when you get bigger than this, it's considered a continent. And Greenland, as you can see, is a long island which actually stretches 2,700 kilometers or 1,700 miles. And it is covered 72% by the ice sheet. And you'll see some photos of the ice sheet. But essentially, it is a very sharp demarcation. And yes, you can walk right up to the ice sheet, and you're standing there looking at this huge, monstrous, towering wall of ice. And if you can figure out how to get up there, you can then walk all the way across Greenland. So it's a rather unique place. It's also unique in terms of its weather. Okay, minus 95 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, so that's really cold. Now, it's also dry, as all of the Arctic is fairly dry. And if you take Binghamton's precipitation rate, which Binghamton is a precipitation rate, which is rain plus snow. Now, this is rain plus melted snow. And melted snow is about 10% of the snow that's just sitting there when it snows. You get about 1.1 meters of rain in Binghamton. And at the bottom of Greenland, you have roughly half of that. So that's half a meter. So you have on the order of this much precipitation as water. But as you move up the ice sheet, you get to drier and drier climates. So by the time you get up to the top, you are less than 10% of the Binghamton precipitation rate. So actually, it is very dry up there. Okay, a little bit of history. Any of you history buffs? Some of you are history buffs. Okay. Fantastic.
Not Greenland, though.
Okay. Not in Greenland. Well, actually, there's a fascinating history with Greenland. And the first evidence that we have, and this is by first, I mean the oldest, according to different dating techniques, okay, is what has been named the Sarkak settlements. And they date back to about the time that the pyramids of Egypt were being built, about 2000 BCE. So this is obviously really ancient history, but the interesting thing, though, is that there's only evidence of scattered Sarkak artifacts here and there. And actually, a lot of those artifacts are old bows and arrows because the Sarkak used to hunt reindeer. Okay. Now, I could ask, what's the difference between reindeer and caribou? And in fact, the answer is there is no difference. Reindeer are caribou. It's just that we call them reindeer when they are domesticated. And so, but they're the same animal. So there are a lot of reindeer or caribou, if you will. In fact, there's both. There's domesticated reindeer and there's caribou, which are wild reindeer on Greenland. And you can see huge herds of them. I've seen many herds of these, and they are just wonderful to watch. Just amazing to see. Okay, the Sarkak civilization, as I mentioned, only have sporadic appearances around the coast of Greenland, and so, in fact, they never did very well because of the harsh climate, and they are only confined to a narrow range of times, right around 2000 BCE. So they didn't last very long either. And in doing a little bit of literature, digging in the literature, I did find an article that said that the Sarkaks probably migrated over from Canada. So they're probably the indigenous Inuits coming from Canada that tried to settle in Greenland and didn't make it for very long. Okay, now, 1,000 years later, they were replaced by what is being called the Dorset people. And the Dorset people were more successful. In fact, they actually lasted about 2,000 years. Okay, so what year are we talking about by the time the Dorsets disappeared?
2000.
Yes, very good. About the question. The answer is 1000. 1000 AD, and that is at the time that the Dorsets disappeared. But back the year 1000 was a very major change in lots of places on the planet. And we're going to talk about the year 1000 in just a minute. So the Dorset culture disappeared, and it is believed that the Dorsets were attacked by the Eskimos, and that is the name given to the Inuit tribes from Canada that were living at this time. Okay. And they basically wanted to settle in Greenland, and they found the Dorsets there, and so they were fighting. And this fighting went on for a long time. However, like most cultures that are at war, there's always intermarriage. And this is why we have very different, the cultures and even the looks of the people, the shapes of their faces and so forth, are very different on the East Coast than the West Coast. Because, as it turns out, the West Coast was where the Eskimos came and settled, but the East Coast is where Europeans came. And we're going to take a look at that next. Okay, what was happening in Europe in the Middle Ages? So, John, of course, this is your bailiwick.
Not even Europe. I do China, so.
China.
I don't.
Wow. Okay. Well, so in fact, we'll talk about China in a minute. However, the interesting thing here is that all of you know that after the fall of Rome, the Dark Ages set in, and this was a time of very great amount of superstition and a great amount of not trusting each other. There was a lot of there were a lot of these attacks going on, and actually farmers who were perfectly fine during the Roman Empire could no longer operate their farms because they'd be attacked. You had to have a whole military in order to protect your farm. Hence the rise of the feudal system. And so a lot of farmers teamed together, and they essentially went to wealthy landowners, and the wealthy landowners could protect them. So that's how the feudal system worked. But most of the people were serfs, right? So they were just working the land, and it was very tough. So as a result, there was not a lot of progress being made. We didn't have technology being developed. We didn't have the arts. We didn't have advances in understanding science. This is starting right after the Roman Empire. There was none of that. And so Europe was in the Dark Ages, and advances were not made, but by the year 1000, Europe was on the rise. And what's really interesting to note is that education systems were being set up throughout Europe. And in fact, the first universities were organized in about 1100. Those were the beginnings of the universities. And they very quickly proliferated, so that there were actually many dozen universities that were started right around the same time at about 1100 all through Europe. And that, of course, gave rise to more interest in technology, more interest in the arts, understanding of science, and this enabled explorers to start. All right, so we're talking, well, eventually, obviously, Christopher Columbus, 1492, but in fact, there were a lot of explorers back around the year 1000 when these institutions were being set up, the schools were being set up. And it was quite interesting that, in fact, in the mid 900s, a Norwegian named Eric the Red, who was a very unusual individual, he decided that he wanted to start building ships, gathering people together. He was one of these charismatic individuals that could get big groups of people together and do things. And he was highly productive, but in fact, he also couldn't control his temper. And he, unfortunately, he ended up killing a lot of people who were working for him because he got mad at them. So he was banished from Norway. So he took a whole group of people and a whole fleet of ships, and they went to Iceland, where he set up colonies there, farms. An amazing individual. And then he was killing people in Iceland. So he was banished from Iceland.
I guess old habits die hard. Don't they?
Habits die hard. He couldn't control his rage. My gosh. So where did he go? He got a bunch of ships together again, and they went to Greenland. So he keeps moving west. And in Greenland, he was there with his wife and a whole group of individuals from Iceland and Norway. Yes. Somebody stayed with him, his wife. Yes.
Didn't get killed.
She didn't get killed. I guess she learned how not to anger. So that was his one claim to fame, because his wife was also a very good organizer. And if you go into the literature and look at the history of this, she played a pretty big role in all of this stuff. So Eric the Red was really talented. He built communities in Greenland. He was there for 3 years, and he set up several communities along the east coast. And he then went back to Iceland, and he gathered 700 people and built 25 ships and got a lot of domesticated animals as well, put them on the ships, and they sailed to Greenland. Now, in order to illustrate how difficult these voyages were, out of 25 ships, 14 of them made it. The others never made it to Greenland. So, your probability was, a little more than 50% of being able to make it. However, he was successful in getting back to Greenland with a little more than half of those people and animals. And he was successful in setting up these colonies in Greenland. Lots of farms. They domesticated the caribou. They were actually very successful. And they were also able to handle the weather. And furthermore, Leif Erikson is Eric's son. He had the same charisma. He got people together, built ships. This is in Greenland, and sailed from Greenland over to Canada. So,
Is he a murdering type too?
I haven't found any evidence of that in the literature. So that's a very, that's right. That's a very good question. Oh, the question for those on Zoom was Leif Erikson a murderer as well? So in any case, I'm not sure if anybody knows or doesn't know, but Leif Erikson is given the credit for discovering North America and Canada. So that was around the year 1000. So you see that the year 1000 was a very important year. Okay, now, this was the beginning of a relationship between Norway and Greenland, of course. all these colonies that were essentially Norwegian. And then what happened was that Norway, Denmark, and Sweden got together and formed what's called the Kalmar Union just before 1400. And these colonies were owned then by the Kalmar Union. So that means that a lot of Swedes were going over to Greenland. A lot of Danes were going over to Greenland, in addition to the Norwegians who were going over there. Okay, this union was not that successful. It was on and off for a while. Sweden eventually left the union. That was a little more than 100 years later. But the country of Denmark, Norway, one country, exactly. Denmark, Norway was in charge of Greenland and Iceland and lots of other of their territories, all the way up to 1814, when the country Denmark-Norway split up. And those overseas possessions, including Greenland, went to the strongest of the two countries militarily, which was Denmark. Right. So Denmark essentially inherited Greenland this way. And Greenland became a colony. And I want to mention that there were a lot of other overseas possessions. They all went to Denmark. So we're talking about the Faroe Islands. Have any of you been to the Faroes? By the way, you've been to the Faroes. Great. Yeah, they are a fascinating place. We did some work on the Faroes in addition to Greenland, and just a marvelous place to visit with its own culture, a unique culture. And of course, we know of the Danish West Indies in the Caribbean, and because they were thinking that that was part of India. But in fact, there were also islands off the coast of India that were owned by this country, Norway, Denmark, Norway, and that went to Denmark.
Are you referring to Sri Lanka slash, can't really know the name for it. Ceylon.
Ceylon. I did not see Ceylon listed in this article about the territories in doing the background work, but there are islands all over that area, and even parts of the mainland. They're little sections. Some of you may be familiar with how Portugal did this with Goa, for example, and in China there's Macau, right? Macau. So in fact, there are links from Denmark, Norway, that country, to all of these locations and all of their overseas possessions, which ultimately Denmark inherited. So they all became Danish. Okay, now Greenland served as this colony all the way up until 1953, when Greenland was granted an advancement in their status. They were then part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And that meant actually that more money could flow from, and more assistance to the people could flow from Denmark over to Greenland. And yes, question.
Is that sort of like here in the what we now call the United States of America, being a territory going to a state? Similar? Not really.
You know, okay, so the question was, is this similar to a territory becoming a state? And I guess my answer to that would be there are all kinds of legal differences between a territory becoming a state versus a colony becoming part of the kingdom of Denmark. But, you know, each of these treaties that were written are different in terms of the fine details of how they're written. And so, you know, in terms of more assistance and help from the centralized government, I would say yes, they both advanced. In other words, a state in the US had a lot more links to the centralized authority, just like Greenland had a lot stronger links to Denmark when this came up. But I'm sure there are a lot of differences for sure. This was in 1953, and then in 1979, there were rumblings in Greenland about Greenlandic people wanting to rule themselves more. And so they negotiated, and in 1979, the Home Rule was passed. And what that meant is that Greenland could have a prime minister, and they could have a legislature, which has existed until today. And in fact, that was a big jump forward. So Greenland Home Rule began. And then in 2008, there was yet more rumbling, and Greenland voted for self-government. This was, again, a treaty between Denmark and Greenland, which meant that they had yet even more power. But, and this is a key, Denmark still today has power over citizenship. Now, the people in Greenland are, in fact, citizens of Denmark. They're citizens of Denmark, which means that they can travel around the EU, for example, even though Greenland itself that landmass is not part of the EU. However, the residents of Greenland can get the EU passport. So you see that there are a lot of these fine differences in terms of the governance. And monetary policy, how much money Denmark gives Greenland, and they give a lot of money, basically for defense, so that Greenland cannot be taken over by anybody else, security, foreign affairs, and so forth. And that's why, and we'll talk about Trump in just a minute, but this is why Trump went to Denmark and basically argued with them about the future of Greenland. It's because Denmark still has that domination over Greenland.
Question about citizenship. Can Danes in Denmark really go to Greenland, or is that limited?
Okay, the question was, can Danes in Denmark freely go to Greenland? And the answer is yes, they can. And a lot of them do. In fact, there's a lot of back and forth between the Danish and the Greenlandic people. There are Greenlandic people in Denmark. There are a lot of Danes in Greenland. So,
If I remember correctly, that Greenland has a separate Olympic team.
oh,
So yeah, I think.
is that right? I don't know the answer to that, Susan. That's a great question.
Their collars on it, and the Danes all wigged out because they didn't want silver for Olympics.
That's good. That's a great question. My gosh. these things are all negotiated. And the relationship between Denmark and Greenland is unique, obviously. It's very special. They're very proud of this relationship. And it seems to be working very well. Okay, Greenland today. 56,500 people. So how big is Binghamton?
A little
40, 50.
Okay, so Greenland has a tiny bit more population than Greenland has. Wow, that's so not a lot of people. Most of that population lives on the southwest coast, and 88% is what we call now Greenlandic Inuit. So they, in fact, are descendants mostly from the Canadians who migrated over, part of that Inuit culture. However, there's been so much intermarriage now and mixing that, in fact, there is a lot of Danish blood in the people of Greenland as well. So it's a rather unique place, a very special place. The capital has 19,000 people, Nuuk, and that's, of course, where the legislature is. There are a total of 31 legislators in Greenland who meet regularly and decide the laws for little villages that are up and down the coast on both sides. But there are still distinct cultures on the east side and the west side because of the influence of Europe on one side and the influence of the Canadian Inuit on the other side. So again, a fascinating place. The land area is 2.2 million kilometers squared, 839,000 square miles, which means that, okay, and I read this on in several papers and on the web, that Greenland is notable in that it has the lowest population density of any landmass on the planet. And that strikes me as kind of odd because I don't think they have as low of a density as Antarctica. And I don't know how they do their counting. But so if anybody can shed any light on this for me, I would like to know why Greenland is considered the lowest density landmass in the world.
Antarctica is not a country. Greenland's part of Denmark. Antarctica is not part of Denmark.
This is exactly the conversation that we need to have in order to settle this. So depending on who is doing the definition of what do we mean by the largest landmass, it's anybody's guess.
If you took out all that huge ice sheet, then you've got the little rims. If you were to drive around those, would the population density look pretty normal, like normal to us?
Okay, so the question was, if you focus on, not on the ice sheet, but on the exposed land all around the coastline, would the population density there be more like other countries? And in fact, you would still be very, very low in population density because there actually is a lot of land that's exposed. Only 72% of this huge island is ice sheet. So you still have 28%, which is mountainous, and there aren't any forests in Greenland, but there's a lot of brush, and that brush extends all around the coast. And so the population density would still be very, very low. Very low.
Are you gonna talk about the climate and what is something happening up there with the ice?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we will. We're actually almost there right now. Okay, the last section of the talk before we get into the science, which is a lot of photos and pictures and things, as well as data. The politics is basically important because Greenland has a lot of natural resources. And this is, of course, why Trump was saying that there's strategic importance in whoever it is that owns Greenland and is responsible for Greenland. And he wanted to make sure that these resources are going to be used by us. Whether that's fair or not fair is something that can be discussed, but in fact, it does have valuable resources. And let me point out that the Greenland ice sheet has a large fraction of the world's fresh water. This is actually perhaps its most valuable resource. If you, I'm sorry?
And it's most dangerous.
And most dangerous, yes. Well, what's very interesting here is that if you melted the water from that ice sheet, you would raise the levels, you would raise sea level by 23 feet. Okay, so think about 23 feet. What would that do to New York City? Well, it would flood it out. I mean, this is a serious problem. So, in fact, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet because of climate change is not a minor issue. And of course, it is irreversible. Once that ice sheet melts, you're not going to be able to figure out a way to get back up there. And furthermore, all of that fresh water will go into the ocean and not be usable by people or animals or ecosystems in the same way. Okay, we are not the first country that's expressed an interest in Greenland. And in fact, Adolf Hitler wanted Greenland. And this is, Susan and I were exchanging emails about this. And there are very interesting papers out. Thank you, Susan, for pointing me in that direction. And in fact, Hitler was aware of the resources and he wanted to control Greenland. And as a result of that, the US forces who were patrolling Greenland starting in April 1941, we moved a lot of our military up to Greenland in order to protect it, specifically from the Nazis during the war. And the Nazis knew this. They didn't attack. So, they had their mind in other directions, other lands. But in fact, those military bases that we set up there in 1941 and expanded are still there. And we have an agreement with Denmark that we can even build more military bases up there. So, which is one reason why there's been so much pushback, of course, from Denmark saying, look, you guys basically have control of Greenland. You don't need to fight us for it. But as we also know, that did not satisfy Donald Trump. So, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in right now. So, okay. The US also, earlier than Trump, tried to buy Greenland for $100 million. Now, you think $100 million? Well, that's not a lot of money by today's standard. However, if you use the consumer price index, in fact, this would be close to $2 billion. Okay, so it's still not very much. However, it at least elevates the amount of money that we were willing to pay for Greenland, but Denmark refused. Okay, 1951, this is the Greenland Defense Agreement that I just talked about. And today, Denmark still has certain control over Greenland, and actually all of the education and healthcare in Greenland is free for everybody who's there. And this is, again, consistent with the Danish socialist system.
Well, I think the old Donald will fix that.
I tend to agree with you, unfortunately. Yes, yes. Okay.
Where's the strength in the leadership of Denmark coming from? Who is it? And is that going to continue on? Because
Well,
did I say Greenland? I meant Denmark.
Denmark.
That they're somehow able to stand up against the forces. Is that going to continue?
NATO.
Okay. All right.
So, and in fact, it's not only NATO, it's especially the US, because we're part of NATO. And essentially, with our military bases, which are strengthened now much more than they were before, those military bases are protecting the island. And Denmark itself, I mean, Denmark is a small cog in a big wheel that includes the US, NATO, and other nations, Canada. So yes, all of this is, it strengthens the defenses that Greenland has. So this is why the schism that Trump has created is a real problem.
Denmark is very famous for their shipbuilding industry.
Yes, absolutely.
Something about aviation, but that I can't remember.
Great, great. That's exactly, Susan is exactly right. That in fact, shipbuilding was actually one of the strengths of the Scandinavian countries going all the way back, including going back to Eric the Red. So shipbuilding is very, very important to the Scandinavians. Okay, now modern politics. All of you know last year, Trump tried to purchase Greenland. And what was really scary is Trump refused to rule out the use of military force to annex Greenland. And of course, the EU responded by sending troops over to Greenland. And when Trump saw that, he realized that, hey, this wasn't going to be a matter of just trying to sweet talk Denmark, that in fact, this was all of NATO that he's basically fighting against. And so on January 21st of this year at the Davos conference, Trump pledged finally not to use military force or to use tariffs in order to try and get his way so that the US could annex Greenland as part of the US. So that everybody kind of breathed a sigh of relief, but I am still very concerned about this. This is a very short sigh of relief because, as we know, Trump could change his mind at any time. And I am not sure if we have time to go into the science at all, maybe.
Let the audience. What do you, can we maybe do it in 5 or 10 minutes?
Oh, yeah, I can easily do it in 5 or 10 minutes.
It's only run till about 12:45.
Oh, okay. Very, very good. So what is the scientific interest in Greenland? Well, it's enormous. Okay. We have learned so much from the research going on in Greenland that, in fact, the National Science Foundation has a whole fleet of aircraft that they use to ferry scientists back and forth, actually from it's the New York Air National Guard in Schenectady that does that. And they have a number of C-141 planes, and that's how we got back and forth from Schenectady up to Greenland. And it was Susan.
In part because General Electric was big deal in terms of aviation in Schenectady. That was their headquarters.
Yes, that's a really good point. So for those of you on Zoom, Susan was just mentioning that General Electric in Schenectady was very big in aviation instrumentation, and of course, that is why the New York Air National Guard base is there, and that is why the flights to Greenland take off from there. Okay, so you can essentially read this slide, but one of the most important things that we can do in Greenland is obtain a history of the atmosphere, because everything from the atmosphere that's carried up by the winds up to Greenland, all of that is reflected in the composition of the Greenland ice sheet. So those pollutants can deposit. That means that dry deposition is very important. And Susan and I have collaborated on dry deposition for decades now. And in fact, it is a field that is so small that, you know, you can practically count the people who devote their energies to studying dry deposition on the fingers of both hands. However, it really does make a difference for Greenland, because dry deposition is how most of those pollutants in the ice sheet get there. And so you have to understand dry deposition in order to understand, to interpret the ice cores. All right. Remember I mentioned you can walk right up to the Greenland ice sheet? Okay. So there's one photo where you can see that if you don't drown in the meltwater coming off, which is continual, then you could make it right up and touch this ice. And getting up to the ice sheet is difficult. That's why the best thing to do is actually take a C-130 from Schenectady and fly up and land up on the ice sheet. It is much easier. Much easier. Okay, this picture was actually taken from a hiking trail where we did a lot of hiking around the coast of Greenland. But when you're in a plane, you can just land up on the ice sheet. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about all these things, but there are a lot of research. There's still a lot of research going on studying that ice sheet, so that when we take these ice cores, which have snow, that some of it is 200,000 years old, you can in fact learn about what the atmosphere was like.
Explain briefly how you do the ice cores.
I've got
You got that's next. Okay, good.
Yes.
You're always ahead of me.
Okay, example of ice core data. Here we are flying. Oh, no, wait, that's the next slide. This slide shows where we were. Dye 3 radar bases right here. It's that location on the ice sheet, which is a little closer to the East Coast than the West Coast. But in fact, the dew line early warning system stretched right across Greenland and Canada. So, and that was to watch for Russian aircraft coming over the pole.
Detection early warning.
Yes, that's exactly right. Detection early warning system. And Die 3 was one of those dew line sites, and that became a headquarters for research for Greenland because it's right up on the ice sheet. You can walk out your door and take an ice core right there. So it's really an amazing place, great place to do research. Okay, here we are flying over the ice sheet, and we're going to go way up on the ice sheet there, and we're going to land at Die 3. And here's Die 3. Not a whole lot to see there except Die 3. And in fact, I will say that when they land planes here, it can even be during a fog. The pilots simply lower the plane until they have Teflon skis on the bottom of the plane, and all of a sudden you bump and you hit the ice sheet. As long as you don't hit the radar base, you're safe.
Is Greenland susceptible? I would imagine it'd be susceptible to continental drift too. If it is, where is it going eventually?
The continental drift. Okay, so the question was about continental drift because the ice sheet must be flowing. It's not stationary, which is true, and it is flowing out to the coasts. But the flow rate is so small that that's not as much of an issue as the melting of the ice sheet. That's really what we're worried about, and in fact, the ice sheet is melting pretty fast now. So there are pools of water all over it, and you cannot just land a plane on it anymore. There are only certain times of the year and certain locations where you can land a plane on the ice sheet now, because in some places the water could be hundreds of feet deep.
Mm.
The ice sheet is really thick. In fact, at the center of Greenland, the ice sheet is 2 miles thick. It's 2 miles thick. And so you can have the top few hundred feet being melted. That's a big enough lake that the plane would go right down into the water. So this is a real problem today. And here's a close-up view of Die 3. And there are, it looks like a golf ball. In fact, the view from up there looking out on the ice sheet is striking because all you see is ice wherever you look. And there is very little topography to that ice. There's slight rolling hills, but they're not very great. Okay, here's our C-130, and we've just landed and we're unloading our equipment. This is an NSF plane, National Science Foundation has these aircraft. Okay, here we are going off to an ice coring site. That's one of NSF's snowmobiles that they purchased. They have lots of snowmobiles up there. And we are going out to sites. And here we are doing a snow pit sampling. We're collecting snow data at different levels. These are my graduate students doing that work. Here, if you look carefully, you can see where we're collecting samples. And it's just done by taking Teflon bottles and pushing them into the wall and pulling them out. And then you cap them, bring them back down to the clean lab to be analyzed for chemistry. So this is what some of the research looks like. There's one of the Teflon bottles being used. And here you can see a shovel used to dig the snow pit. And you can see layers of ice. And I want to call attention to this side photo, which is an ice core. This photo was collected by Lonnie Thompson Did any of you see the movie An Inconvenient Truth?
Yes.
Okay, so some of you saw that. That is about climate change. It was put together by Al Gore, and Lonnie Thompson is in that movie. He has sections in there where he's talking about the research going on in Greenland. And Lonnie Thompson's a wonderful guy. He's a good friend. He's at Ohio State University, and he has done a lot of the pioneering work on glaciers all over the world, including the Alps, the Andes, and other locations. So as well as the Arctic and the Antarctic. Okay, and finally, the key findings. There's a lot of uncertainty in the dating when you get back really deep, but within certainly for the last few thousand years, it can be quite accurate. When you start getting down to 200,000, 220,000, 230,000 years, it may be off by 10,000 years plus or minus. But nevertheless, we have good data from that area. And you can see major volcanic eruptions. And I'll show this last slide, which shows the volcanic eruptions as sulfate data. Let's see, a lot of analyses, carbon dioxide particles, so forth. Okay, so this last slide. Okay, so the work that I did was with Paul Majewski from University of New Hampshire. And Paul is just an amazing glaciologist. And he was in charge of the deep ice core drilling at Summit in the center of Greenland. And I had many of my graduate students go up there with Paul Majewski to do sampling as part of the deepest ice core, which goes all the way down to bedrock. It is a 2-mile long ice core. Susan.
2 miles with a Teflon bottle, or is that? There's a different.
It is a completely different tool. Yes, I don't have slides of the drills that were used to go down, but those drills are remarkable pieces of equipment that people like Paul Majewski and Lonnie Thompson, who are, experts in ice core drilling, have engineered in order to be able to go all the way down to bedrock, 2 miles. And we do now have a continuous record that is 2 miles long of every centimeter of ice going all the way down 2 miles. And we have learned an enormous amount about climate change, pollution, and so forth.
Back to the picture with the layers, you see the black stripes?
Yes.
Stripes. One more. There you go. So are those gray stripes, do I understand that correctly, that would be from a volcano?
The stripes.
Oh, the stripes. You mean on the graph?
The ice.
The ash deposit.
Oh, no, that's just for holding it's for transporting the ice core.
What's going first?
The picture on the right.
Those
Picture on the
stripes.
left.
Oh, I'm sorry, on the left. Okay, that's from the snow pit. And going all the way down 2 miles, there were those ice layers. And that means that even though the temperature was always below freezing, there was enough energy coming from the sun, which is, of course, up in the sky 24 hours a day in the summer, that in fact, that energy melts just a thin layer on the surface. And that thin layer tells you that this must be summer because it's dark 24 hours a day in the winter. And there isn't melting. So as we go down deeper and deeper, what happens is the ice gets compressed. And these layers, you see how how much these layers spread all the way down to here. All of that we're looking at here is what from one summer. This is one summer. So you've got huge amounts of snow for the top layers. And then as you go down, they get smaller and smaller until finally you've got 1,000 years in one little section of ice. So the scale, the distance scale and the time scales are amazingly different as you go down. Right.
Fascinating.
Any more questions? Any more questions from the boat people?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Well, I would take.
Except I have a question. What can we do? Is there anything?
Oh, wow. Boy, that's a whole nother seminar. There's an enormous amount we can do if we only had the will to do it. And if we had the leadership to do it, because these things have to be coordinated from the top.
Yeah.
And of course, that begins with the president. And so it is absolutely essential that we have everybody on board. That's why we don't have major changes in our lifestyle right now. We should be having changes. We absolutely need those changes, including the food we eat, including the vehicles that we drive, including using aircraft for short flights, like, from Binghamton. Are there flights from Binghamton down to New York City?
There used to be.
There used to be.
Not anymore. Had a long time.
Okay.
They might get the railroad going again.
Well, the railroad uses a tiny fraction of the energy that an aircraft uses. Or a car. So, absolutely. Or a car.
Any more questions? Any more comments?
Oh, I was gonna comment, but
Okay.
now as far as trains and a high-speed rail, we're probably going to be the last one on Earth to have it, It pains me to say this, but just too taken over by corporate interests.
Absolutely. I agree.
This was terrific. Thank you.
It was excellent.
Oh, good.
Thank you. I always like that. Great. Because it's not just now, it was then, and it's in the future. So thank you.
Great. Thank you for the invitation to come. I really appreciate it.